All right, hello. Just letting our participants arrive. Great. Seen a lot of familiar faces. Nice to see you all. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Ashley. I'm with Big Apple Film Festival. It's so nice to meet you.
And a pleasure to be met. Nice to meet you as well.
Great. Well, we're just, I'm seeing everyone arrive, which is great. I can go ahead and start kind of our introduction here. So for our audience who's here, again, my name is Ashley Hauser with Big Apple Film Festival. This week we have our screenwriting conferences. And then we also, in person in New York, have screenings happening all week. I hope that you're able to attend. They're happening at the Quad Cinema. And now, without further ado, I introduce Jordan Roberts. Hello.
Hello.
And Jordan, I thought we'd start off, maybe if you could just tell us a little bit about your background, how you got involved in the industry, and part of your story. And then that'll probably give some time for our attendees to, write their own questions in the chat.
Beautiful. Well, hello. First off, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here. Let's see. I was a very, very unsuccessful actor, not for lack of passion or interest. I don't know that I was particularly good at it, and I certainly wanted to be. I also, I think, had a drug and alcohol problem, which didn't help much. So that's just a fact. I used to do a lot of new plays, and I used to be a bit of a pain to the writers of those plays. And I used to talk about how I could do it and should do it. And eventually I did do it when I got sober. And writing that play it was probably almost 40 years ago. It took a lot of time, and the play ended up getting done around the country a fair amount. It didn't make very much money, but it was a great experience, and it taught me how to write narrative to be performed live with voice. And then I decided I probably wanted to have a family, and playwriting didn't strike me as an option for that. And somebody told me I should go to California, where I was from, but I had fled to move to New York as an actor. Went there, moved to an apartment that was right next to the Writers Guild. It's still there. It's a different building, but they still have a library. It's still open to the public one day a week. And I started reading screenplays. And eventually, somewhere in Los Angeles, they did a reading of my play. An agent came along. He loved the play. He thought I could write screenplays. I told him I was reading them. He said, keep reading them and write one. I wrote one. It did not get sold at that point, but it became what's called a sample or a spec script, and it led to 27 years of writing screenplays. I've written 63. They've made a tiny portion of those. I've learned a lot, and I guess I'll save the rest for questions or whatever, but that's my story. And I now I live up in a tiny island in Canada. I have technically left Hollywood and am only writing what I want to write, which is not something that any young person needs to concern themselves with necessarily, but I am at an age where I don't have to write what they want me to write anymore, and so I don't.
Oh, what a wonderful place to be.
It is.
That's so great. Great. And then just for audience participants just arriving, if you all have any questions at all, go ahead and you can type it in. There's a Q&A section that'll be at the bottom of the Zoom tab. We'd love to hear from you. I guess I'll kick us off with some questions of my own. I always kind of like to start out with this one. As a writer, what would you say are some of the most valuable tools in your toolbox?
Let's see. Well, I guess I probably haven't changed, although my capacity to wield those tools has risen and fallen over the years. But really, I don't think I could share anything that is more valuable than developing the capacity to write without judgment. There is nothing that will matter, in my opinion, as much as that. And that for most of us requires a fair amount of practice. When we talk about writer's block, I believe that what we're talking about is a perfectly healthy disinterest in writing when you're beating the shit out of yourself. And that gets folded into this term called writer's block. Most people I know don't actually have writer's block. What they have is a healthy response to the ways in which they write. And so it takes a long time if you're like 90% of the people I know and you're busily engaged in a process of let's just call it modestly self-dislike, and occasionally it's self-hatred. It shouldn't be the case, but it frequently is. And if it applies to you, then I'm advising you to recognize the need to take that ingredient out of your writing. And the way I say that you do that is, and I do it, is with practice. And if I cannot write without judgment, that session is done. So the most important tool is capacity to write freely. Again, judgment will come. It's imperative. I am not a sloppy writer. I'm not a first draft writer. Writing is rewriting. But the way you start the process of writing is to write freely, to write with abandon.
That's beautiful. I love that. And I can imagine it could be so helpful and such a great life lesson that can, relate to so many different areas as well. What do you say too on the topic of, oh, you know what? Never mind. I think we've got a question from Connie. Hi, Connie. Connie writes, hi, Jordan. How do you adapt yourself to writing different genres and mediums? Thank you.
I'm not sure I adapted myself as much as I got adapted. As I said, I started as a playwright. I came out of the theater. I loved the theater. I spent a lot of years in it. And so my first medium was the stage, and theater is primarily a verbal medium. There is obviously imagery at play in the theater, and it's important, but it is primarily delivered. The stories are delivered through human voices and communication. And so I had sort of mastered through practice that idea. And so when it came time to become a screenwriter, that was the first genre switch I was introduced to when I came to Hollywood. And by reading screenplays, you recognize that there's a very powerful component in motion pictures, which is pictures. It is a series of images that can tell a story. And in some ways, and even the best pictures, obviously dialogue is important, but some really wonderful directors I've had the chance to work with have imported upon me that it is a visual medium. And so I learned how to make that transition through practice and through a lot of trial and error and a lot of failure, to be honest. I think I wrote plays in screenplay format for some time. And eventually I started to write screenplays, which were, as I said, a combination of storytelling with the use of the voice and storytelling through the use of not just what you see, but the end, because I'm also a director. I became a director. How in which you are showing the things that we are seeing. The camera actually can change the way the story is told and what the story means. So, and then the final medium I would say is, and I came to it quite late, was television, which it has absolutely nothing to do with screenwriting in many, 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 many ways, which might come as a surprise or may not be. But and then I will just to succinctly tell you the differences I've discovered in television and film is characters do not need to change in television, and they frequently do not. If you watch a television series for multiple seasons, you're going to watch a character not change in the way that they are required to change in cinema. Generally, it's one of the reasons cinema, it's one of the pros and possibly a cons of cinema, is this opportunity to engage in this extremely potent and short examination of a transformation of a life. You meet a hero, man or woman, you're presented with a dilemma that they can't solve. They will solve it, or occasionally they will not solve it, but the story is over when they do or they don't solve it. Television, the creation of a pilot, is the creation of a perpetual motion machine. You create in an hour or a half an hour a landscape that will allow your character to function week after week after week after week in essentially the same dynamic. So you surround that person with challenges and an environment that will allow the repetition. So practice. That's the shorter answer to her very good question. Practice.
Fantastic. Kind of out of curiosity, because I understand you come from the theater. Wondering, was there a particular play that maybe has stuck with you through the years or inspired you to kind of to write or to even act in general? You know,
no, for sure. Great question. Absolutely. I'm not sure if it's done anymore or if it's even well known, but there were two and they happened around the same time. I come from actors. My mother was an actor and I wanted nothing to do with that world, right? Until I was 18 and I saw two plays within a given period of a couple months. One was The Chorus Line, which was, we all know, but the second was a play called Equus, which was a British play by, and I'll get in a second. He also wrote Amadeus. And then a month later, I saw David Bowie in 1972 do the first Ziggy Stardust tour. And those three things introduced me to the idea of visual, the power of visual and auditory storytelling. You know, the three was a musical, a play, and then a rock performer who was quite theatrical, as we all know. And those three unhitched a part of my brain. But I would say Equus is probably the play I've stolen from most passionately for the last 40 years. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic.
Beautiful play.
Yeah. That's great. For our some of our screenwriters in the audience here, would you have any advice for acquiring representation, or or if you could walk us through that process, what it was like for you?
Well, I hope it's the same, but I fear it's not. I was lucky enough to come into this business at a time when people in this business knew how to read, and they knew how to read screenplays. They knew how to read plays. And it appears as if, and not to sound like the old guy, but it appears as if that landscape has changed. And even if you write a screenplay, people want to be shown a treatment of that screenplay or a 2-page version of the screenplay. And in the good old days, there were just a ton of people who loved writing, loved reading, and loved writers and nurturing them. And so those people found me. I looked, but they found me because there were people whose job it was to look for that. I don't know if it's because there's so many people that are more interested in it, if that's even true, I don't know, or if it's just, what we all understand to be the increased threat on bandwidth that modern life is presenting, and people just don't have time or energy, but they found me. What I will say is the most important thing is to make sure that you're not sharing work prematurely, because your opportunities are limited and you frequently don't get second bites at the apple. That's unfortunate, but it is true. And most of us are like, it's either a combination of laziness or we're so hard on ourselves that we can never get beyond that first draft. But as I said, handling your self-esteem issues is paramount. And then once you've done that enough to get your criticism out of the way so that you can actually create something original of your own that reflects your voice and your beliefs, the next business is to learn how to, with some discipline, hone that into the best thing it can be, at which point you share it. But we don't just share what we call the vomit draft, and we don't not allow ourselves to create the vomit draft by stifling our that beautiful impulse. And vomit is probably not the right word. There's a lot of negative connotations with it. But the draft that is created in freedom is the key ingredient to begin the process that will then evolve into levels of discernment, wherein you examine that draft and make sure you're doing exactly what you want, and you're paying attention to, style and what you've learned from reading other screenplays, and you're honing it into something whole and as good as it can be. And that is the point which you share it with someone. And the way you share it with is anyone who you can, share it with. Anyone. And sometimes we have to pay to do that these days, I'm told, and that's okay. Some of these sources are actually good. Just pay attention to the internet and read the reviews of different organizations that help you find scripts. You're going to have negative experiences. Your first one might be negative. Someone might steal your idea. That might happen. It's always good to register your work with the Writers Guild. You do not need to be a member of the Writers Guild to register your work, which is to place a copy in a digital copy in a safe place with a date on it, so that nobody can take that screenplay and steal it. They will anyway, but you'll have a recourse of action. But make sure it's the best it can be, and then give it to anyone who will listen. And when you find allies, respect them. Pay attention to the people who helped you. Stay in touch with them. Ask how you can give them back. Don't be just a needy siphon. How can you help the person who's helping you? And be as courageous as you can, and just begin the long, arduous practice of dealing with rejection, because it's going to happen. A lot.
We have another question. Do you have any advice on writing multi-dimensional characters and not fall into stereotypes?
Advice. It's great. I'm not sure. I'm trying to think about the technique. I mean, I clearly aspire to write multi-dimensional characters. Okay, here's something I know helps. Refrain from judgment. Refrain from judgment. That's for start. So you find yourself creating a character, you find yourself engaged with the character who was introduced to you in a dream or a moment of inspiration, or somebody you see on the street, you say, I want to write about that person. Allow that person to surprise you. Don't make decisions about what they have to reflect. You may find in the later drafts, much later, that in the interest of clarifying two sides of a debate, or conflicting ideas that are going to be tossed about through the play or the screenplay, you may find that you need to tighten up the point of view on a particular character and maybe make them not so ambivalent or multifaceted. But in the creation of those characters, I think it's imperative that you be incredibly gentle and playful. Allow them to surprise you, and again, that all comes naturally when you're not in the practice of unsurprising yourself, when you're living in curiosity as a writer, which again is going to take you a lot of practice. So please, whoever you are, start now. Start practicing not judging yourself, and that will also help you create characters that you're also not judging, and they too will surprise you. So this strict Bible thumping, earnestly Christian man will find himself following a young woman in a yellow car around the corner, and following her home and parking in front of her house. I'm just making this up, by the way, but be willing to go there. Don't just, I'm just saying, don't make decisions about who these people are. Let yourself, I keep saying the same thing, let yourself be curious. Be curious as a writer, and be curious of every character you create. Let them teach you. Don't be so smart.
That's great. Yeah, it's amazing what happens when you can let go of judgment.
Yeah.
Another question from Sam Chuck. Sam writes, hi, Jordan. As a student filmmaker, I struggle with jumpstarting my screenplays. Before you start your first draft, do you write an outline to help guide you throughout the writing process? Or does it work best to get everything out on the page and then start to fine tune after you finish the first draft?
Well, I think you know where I'm going to go with that. I mean, I too have the impulse to try and tell myself what the story is going to be, supposedly in the interest of saving time, you know, but the reality is, it's the second approach you mentioned, Sam, is the way that actually is the most time saving to me. Just to get a bunch of pages. I'm writing a brand new play. I'm not editing at all as I go. I have no, that's not true. I have some ideas. You probably do too, Sam. Like when you start a screenplay, you kind of have a general idea of what it is. But I personally, and by the way, there are people who do benefit from a kind of strict, structured roadmap that without it, they can't function. So that is a reality. And so much of what I'm saying is not going to be of use to a person of that type. But if you're like me, you might have the impulse to create that structure and that roadmap, only to discover later that you're stuck because you're criticizing yourself about not being able to follow it perfectly or by wanting to make changes. And so I personally like to generate somewhere between, depending on the medium, somewhere between 40 and 90 pages of people talking to each other and doing shit. At which point I then go back and go, where is this alive? Where is this really crystal? Where are these characters declaring themselves with total clarity? And allow that to inform the next pass, which is only slightly less free. That makes sense? Very briefly, I'm going to say that there are 4 hats I wear as a writer, and I will now share them with you. And they work, but they cannot be worn out of order, and they cannot be worn 2 at a time. They go like this: madman or mad woman, mad person, insane person, complete, unhinged, anything goes. I'm writing a scene about a man and a woman, and a giraffe walks into the room and starts talking to them. Do not edit. Giraffe gets lines, whatever. He may not be in the rest of the scenes, but he's in that one. Mad person. Second is architect, which is only slightly less mad. You start to deal with the basic fundamentals. You're still not in discernment, but you're starting to deal in the basic fundamentals of maybe shape, possibly gravity, but you're still pretty unhinged. Architect. Third hat, carpenter or engineer. I prefer carpenter. It's only then that you're starting to deal with things like shape and structure, right? But you're still not a judge. That's the 4th hat, judge. And you need all 4, but you don't do them. And what we call writer's block is basically somebody who's wearing that judge hat, in my opinion, somebody who's wearing that judge hat at the beginning. Madman, delicious. It takes practice. If you start writing your Madman draft, if you can't stop judging, you're done for the day. Come back tomorrow. Try to stay a mad person a little longer tomorrow. When the judge comes back, if it comes back, you're done for the day. Stay in a mad person, then architecture, then carpentry, and finally judge, where you actually start using that part of your brain, which will be ready to be used at that point and has been rested. I don't know how I got on that, but I hope I answered Sam's question. Yeah.
Oh, that was so insightful. That was a good way to break it down too. We have another question. Big Hero 6 had multiple writers with story input from the studio. I'd love some insight on the group writing process.
On that process. Well, it was my first and only time. Well, when you're there at Disney, you work on everything. So I worked on Zootopia and Frozen and Moana. You kind of contribute, but Big Hero was the project I was on. It was very different. It was hard to work the way we're talking about because obviously you're in a community. But what I will say about animation, which was fascinating and ultimately also deeply frustrating, is it's highly collaborative, right? And like I say, sometimes that's the potential for that was enormous, and sometimes it wasn't. And what I mean by that, as a writer, my job was to create a story that made sense from beginning, middle, and to end. And there's a group of people in the animation process who are among the most talented people I've ever met. They're called storyboard artists. And they basically take the writer's first iterations of a screenplay and you work in reels. So there's usually 6 or 7 reels in an animated feature. So you'll take the first reel, I'll write something up that it sort of creates the narrative in some situations and some action and but basically the characters and the narrative and the debates, et cetera. Like, and then these storyboard artists are given free reign, which again, this comes in both possibly exciting and also occasionally maddening freedom that these young men and women of tremendous talent are given to interpret what you've done almost any way they like. So in other words, they are not required to render what you've written in 2 dimensions. They're allowed to do whatever they want. And so in many ways, they're sort of the unsung heroes of animation, because these people, they're both directors, they're cinematographers because they can create the frame, they're actors because they create the performance. They're doing these in 2-dimensional drawings. They're editors because they create in which the scene is jumps from shot to shot to shot, or frame to frame, like a comic book. And they're writers, so they're amazingly talented. But from a writer's perspective, where my job is to pay attention from frame 1 to frame 10,000, an hour and a half later, it was sometimes frustrating because things would come up. It's a little bright. Things would come up in the imaginations of these storyboard artists that were so wonderful that everybody fell in love with them, but they violated the narrative. And so then the narrative would possibly change, or the writer would sometimes have to and convince them to jettison this thing they were all fallen in love with because it was so beautifully animated, that because it was in violation of the central premise of the film. Make sense? So a writer's job in the animation space is to both provide seeds for this magic of these brilliant artists, but at the same time, you're also trying to guide. And I remember the day that it was clear to me, and I'm no problem saying this out loud because it was clear to me, and this was my idea of what this film was, and I had to fight for this, and eventually there were lots of allies in this. Big Hero 6 is about a boy who has to decide if he's going to use his brother's robot to kill or to heal, period. And that's the kind of thing that writers are in charge of. Sometimes directors, and sometimes storyboard artists, and sometimes actors, and sometimes other participants are not necessarily interested in following that storyline or even care about it. Some of the most talented directors I've ever worked with, and I've worked with a lot, their skill is not in what the writer's skill is, which is what I just said. This is a story about a boy who decides whether he's going to use that robot to heal or kill. That's not how directors think sometimes. Some do, but many of them are like about the moment. Actors are about the moment. So the writer's job in animation is, in my opinion, different people would say different, is to both provide the seed of that magic to happen, but also keep your eye on the big prize. And sometimes you're the only guy in the room doing that. So that's why, or person in the room, I should say. And that's why, for me personally, it was both, I loved the film. They did an amazing job, but it was fucking frustrating. And that script basically represents, that movie basically represents draft 3. And I wrote 13, and guys came back after me. These lovely writers came after me and wrote 10 more. Then we went back and basically made draft 3, but it's a long process. Probably won't do it again.
Wow, that's great. Really, really interesting to kind of hear about that process. I guess, and we've got another question from Genevieve. Great. Hi, Genevieve. Genevieve writes, "Hi, Jordan. I've been told my scripts would be a great limited series or a book because I love to write about historical pivotal moments in time that center around war. I come from film, so I've been hesitant to cross platforms. What advice would you give? Should I remain true to myself or consider the leap?"
Give me 1 second because my headphone is dying. So give me a second.
Oh,
okay?
yeah, no worries.
There we go. Okay, I'm going to do this seamlessly. Did I do it already?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Almost. Actually, you know what? I'll just talk to you over. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen. Nobody decide what format or medium or framework you want to tell your story. And by the way, you may tell the same historical story. There could be a series about a battle in the Civil War, or there could be a film about a battle in the Civil War, or there could be a short film about, or a poem about a battle in the Civil War. So you get to decide that. But
I think it probably, this is an oversimplification, Genevieve, but I think that you want to spend some time exploring the issue I talked about a little earlier, which was how much is the character going to change during the course of this story? Is this a story that can you tell this story in an hour and a half to 2 hours and have your central character or characters actually transform into something different and face a challenge that they cannot face on page 10 and triumph over that challenge on page 110? Or is this a story where really what you're going to watch is somebody walking through in their current iteration of a person and meet the same challenge over and over and over again, and slowly, and that might be a way in which you make the decision. And then whether it's fiction or nonfiction, again, that's going to be trial and error. You know, we all have different voices, and some of us can't write nonfiction, and some of us can't write fiction. You know, so I think you're going to have to just listen to yourself, and again, trial and error. But I do think it's worth paying attention to how much does the character change. How much that, you know, Walter White in Breaking Bad, he didn't really change over the course of, you know, he made a decision in the pilot. He basically stayed the course as in, you know, you pick a TV show and that's probably going to be the case. And so that would reflect that. Even many, what do they call, limited series, same thing.
Nice. We've got another question from Carl.
Oops, no, I can't hear you. Did you say something?
Oh no, can you hear me now?
Oh,
There? Yeah,
Oh,
now I hear you.
you can hear me. Okay,
Yeah.
yay. We've got another question from Carl. Carl writes, when juggling multiple ideas for your next story, what factors help you narrow your choice down?
That's a great one. I mean, I'm assuming that the person is asking, you have multiple different stories, not multiple stories going on in the same script.
Let's see.
If you read it again, I might be able to.
Yeah, I'll read it again. So when juggling multiple ideas for your next story, what factors help you narrow your choice?
So I'm going to go with, I hope I'm answering it right. I'm going to go with that. This is when I have multiple ideas that I want to explore in screenplay or dramatic format. How do I lean to one? Just start writing them. You'll know. You'll know. You know, I have right now, I want to write a play. I want to write a TV show. I want to write 2 films. I can't stop writing the play. So I guess I'm going to write the play. You know, in other times in my life, it's presented in, you know, obviously some other era, but it's best defined by, like most things, it's best defined by action and not intention. Intentionality is a great thing, but as we all know, we can intend to do things and not actually do them, or we can intend to do one thing and intend to do something else instead. But what we do is a better indicator of what we ought to do, in my opinion. So write the thing that is you're writing. And but here's the most important thing, and this is, I suffer from this, as I've already said. Just write. Start one. And if it's not catchy, you start the other. But the most important thing for writers is to write. And again, going back to self-esteem, you're going to have to handle that, or you're not going to pick up that 10,000 pound pen or put your fingers on that, you know, spike, you know, poison infested keypad. So handle self-esteem. Love your dog, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Yes, this is Huxley. He's right here.
Nice. Hanging on every word I'm saying.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Very much enjoyed
that. Thank you. Well, great questions, everyone in our audience. Keep it up. I guess kind of as we've kind of been talking about different genres and writing for that, I was wondering if you might be able to speak to writing a bit for a documentary and how, if it presented its own challenges, if you lean more one way or the other.
Yeah, I'm not a documentary filmmaker. I was hired by a dear friend at Warner Independent, to work on March of the Penguins when he saw it at Sundance, and they were thinking of buying it. They did buy it, and with National Geographic, and they originally approached me about translating it. It was a French movie, and very successful in France. And in the film, the French film, the penguins talk. It is not a documentary, it's a feature film. And the penguins talk to each other, and they talk in extremely flowery language. I will choose you, and we will love and love, and love will make light, and from the light will come new life, and life will be, and that's what the movie was. And I really didn't like it. I thought the photography was extraordinary. I thought the story was extraordinary. And so I said, I'm out. I can't do this. I don't want to write. I don't want to translate these things. I think let's just, if you want me to like write a narration for it, let's get, James Garner or Morgan Freeman to write it. They were like, the French didn't want to do that. Not have no problem with the French not wanting to do that. They didn't want to change their movie. They tested the movie in the United States. The movie did not test very well. And Warner Brothers was going to bow out because other people like me didn't really get it. They loved the images, but and so after months, they came back and said, okay, do you want to do this? And the French signed off very reluctantly. And that's how it happened. And I wouldn't quite call it a documentary. It was one of the funniest part of my career was going there because the movie did very well and it was up for all the awards. And so I was doing all that circuit that you do when movies are getting awards, and with all the real documentary filmmakers. I made the little talking bird love story movie, and the real documentary filmmakers like really hate March of the Penguins. And I don't have a problem with that. I understand it's not as anthropomorphic as the film. In other words, it's not, I suspect most of you know what that word means, but it's not giving human characteristics to animals as much as the film did, but it's a story about birds who fall in love. And so it's not a documentary, it's just a bedtime story. And so that's my only experience with documentaries. I'm fascinated by it. It's an amazing, they're real writers, but they don't have an idea. They start filming and the story reveals to themselves. The good documentaries are all created live in front of you. You're filming something and all of a sudden you do something. I'm like, that's my movie, and so it's thrilling to me, but I've never been involved in it. So I'm a fake documentary narration writer.
Yeah, that's a great way to kind of think about it. You were really, writing like, it's not a documentary, it's a love story.
Yeah. Well, they made a love story. I was trying to honor the original film. I didn't want to like radically, and they were very, they were unhappy, which is very funny. When they won the Oscar for the film, but the Oscar was the one we made, and they, they didn't thank us. And I don't like really, in all seriousness, if somebody took one of my movies that I made and took all the dialogue out and had Morgan Freeman narrate it, I'd probably be upset too. So no problem.
Great. Let's see here. I'm just checking. Oh, we've got another question here. Great. From Carl. How did you find the transition to directing with Burn Your Maps?
I'd actually made, that was the third movie I made. The first one was a thing called Around the Bend. And the transition happened just out of pure frustration. I just wrote for, gosh, I think 7 or 8 years, and nobody was making anything, but I was a success. I kept getting jobs, and so I went back and made that first movie that I had written, the first script I'd written that got me the agent, that got me the I went back and made that. And I never really felt like I was friends with filmmakers, and I'd spent a little bit of time on sets, and I liked it. And I used to be an actor, and I always liked actors, and I liked talking to them, and I directed some plays. So I knew how to do that, or enough of how to do that but it was frustration. It was like many writers who become directors. I became a director simply out of frustration that nobody was making my work. And my work was of a particular type. Everything I've done bounces a little liberally between tones of shadow and light. And that's not the most common landscape. And so I understood it in a way that a lot of directors just didn't. They thought it's not funny enough, or it's too dark, or it's too, and so frustration, short answer, absolute frustration, like many writer directors before me. So
we've got another question here. Do you have any tips on writing non-dialogue films?
Well, yeah, I mean, well, all films are kind of non-dialogue. I mean, they are and they're not, but you know, the, the Don Hall, the director of Big Hero 6, used this term that I'd never heard before. It was sound down. Sound down. Let's sound down. Are we telling the story sound down? And he'd insist upon it, which, was great, because at the end of the day, moving pictures are moving pictures. That's what they are. They're not moving mouths. They're moving pictures. And I suspect that I tried to apply the same liberal withholding of judgment that I do in dialogue and in other articulations of screenwriting to this idea of the visual storytelling. So if I'm trying to tell a story about a person who I just moved to this tiny island in Canada, it's, if I wanted to tell this story, I would probably, think about, well, a guy lived in a big city in Los Angeles for 30 years. So it might start with, street traffic and noise and cars and, a home in Los Angeles. And then pretty soon I'm going to get to this other thing, which is not that. And so make sure that how are you telling the story of this person in moving out of the interface with concrete and automobiles into an interface with water and trees and sky and dirt and rocks? How are you going to do that? So I would hopefully be willing to be surprised in that endeavor as well. So not assume that I know what it's going to look like, but same principle. Just how do you surprise yourself while trying to take yourself where the story wants to go? Man comes from Los Angeles to Island. What are the images that pop up? And again, it's so easy for us to try to think our ways. And again, that might work for some people. I'm only speaking about me and for people like me. I am nowhere near as clever as I am interesting when I get out of my way and allow what's happening to me to pass through me onto the page. I cannot think my way into a better screenplay than I can allow myself to be used to write. And that may sound metaphysical, and it's not. It's real. I want to impress you as much as the next guy. Nobody wants to impress people more than me. Nobody wants to see, I didn't go to college, and I've spent a lot of my life trying to make you think I'm smart because I didn't go to college. And that ain't good for my writing. What's good for my writing is getting out of my way and allowing things to move through me. And it's so much easier. It's so much easier. So did I answer the question? I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Yeah. Rob writes very well put, Jordan.
I love a good compliment.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Let's see here. Well, you guys, we've got probably about five more minutes left. If anyone has any more questions in the chat, if not, we'll keep chatting. I was wondering, Jordan, too, like, was there a moment in your career that you felt like, gosh, I feel like this is where I'm supposed to be. This is, feeling really good in your writing, or something that an opportunity that came?
I think a few. I mean, I've been at it for a long time, so there were definitely a few. When I wrote my first play, there was one. I'm not an actor, and I may become an actor again, or I've tried it a little bit recently, and I'm enjoying it. But that was clear. I'm not an actor. I'm a storyteller. I'm a storyteller. So that was one. When I was on the set of a film, David O. Russell, a film set of his, I was like, oh. And I helped another friend cut a film. And the act of taking, and we were cutting on an actual film. It wasn't digital. We were slicing film, and the act of taking images and words and slicing them together and discovering the rhythm of them was like, whoa, that was the movie moment, And then as a screenwriter, I suspect that, gosh, it's I think it's funny, they're more directing moments, but apart from that first epiphany of, oh, I'm not an actor, I want to tell stories. Oh, and I think there was a point at which I realized I'd finally stopped writing plays and I'd written a film that was visually driven. And then those were progressive victories. And I wrote a Hot Wheels movie a few years ago, which was the kind of, I don't know, you tell me if it's being made. But it was a series of images to tell a story, and it was primarily a motion picture. And I really was excited about having finally pegged that you could watch that movie with no dialogue and understand it. So those were some.
Hmm. And then, we've got another question, Rob. Thank you. How do you feel about improvising? Are you open to it, or would you prefer actors sticking to the script for certain moments?
It depends. Totally depends. The first movie I made, the actors all agreed that they weren't going to improvise. It was and some of them were better than others. Anyway, they all agreed they weren't going to do it. It was Michael Caine, and who didn't like to do it, and Chris Walken. I can't believe my first film I got to work with these people, but I did. And Chris Walken liked it, but he was willing to give it up, and a young actor named Josh Lucas didn't care. So they'd agreed that it would be best to not, and they didn't. The next movie I made, I made myself, and was with Charlie Hunnam and Chris O'Dowd, who is probably incapable of not improvising to everyone's benefit. He was a tremendously talented man. Charlie was also a good improviser. It's not his strong suit in the way it was for Chris. Chris Noth was also in it. What's his name? Ron Perlman. There were a lot. There was Lizzie Kaplan. There was a lot of improvisation, and I love the movie, by the way. So that's a plug. But it was a comedy, and it lent itself to that, and I was quite comfortable with it. Again, it was because I have the ability to hold on to the whole, that I had some success allowing you to take the thing wherever you wanted to take it, be in the moment with you and judge how that was going, but also hold on to the whole idea. I would say that improvisation is much easier for me as long as I have that whole idea. What is Frankie Go Boom about, the second film? What is it? What is the story that needs to be told? And as I hold that in some part of my head, and I know that that's safe. It's almost like the structure, the skeleton's there. You can put whatever kind of skin you want on it within reason. But if the skeleton starts to break, that's when I stop you and I say, no, let's go back either to the text, or let's at least not go in that direction. But the short answer is sometimes it's wildly beneficial, and I am not precious about my work unless it matters. Burn Your Maps was, again, we went back to a little bit more of a honoring of the script, but there were moments where it made sense to let actors trust their particular impulse, because there's nothing quite like the art of acting, which is the art of staying fully and completely in a moment, 100% alive in that moment, despite the fact that that moment is defined by given circumstances. Right? There are given circumstances, but inside those given circumstances, you are a completely free agent. That's what acting is. And the ability to do those two things is extraordinary. And so you want to take advantage of that. So occasionally there are actors who can, in fact, not occasionally, there are many actors who can live within the given circumstances and then explore spontaneously all sorts of different opportunities or ways in which they articulate a moment. And I think a director's job is to celebrate that, again, as long as the given circumstances are A, being honored, or B, sometimes you go like, oh shit, my given circumstances were wrong. This improvisation is so good, it's challenging my given circumstances. And I'm going to go, well, shit, man, maybe this movie isn't the movie I thought it was. And that has happened as well. We're going to go in a direction I didn't plan on. And I think it's important to be willing to do that. Some directors will never do that. Writers don't have much power. Unless you're the director, they're going to do whatever they want to your script. I hope that's not bad news to people, but that is the reality. Actors and directors will do whatever they want with your material, unless you're directing yourself. And some of us are okay with that. Some of us aren't.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I'm just looking at the time. We are just about out of time. But just a response from Rob, he says, fantastic answer. Thank you. I'm a big fan of improv, and I'm glad you mentioned the skeleton and arc, getting from point A to point B and staying in the moment from an actor and challenging those circumstances.
Yeah, beautiful.
Great. Well,
happy to help.
Hey, thank you so much for taking the time. We had a wonderful conversation.
Good.
Thank
Can
you
you
for-
answer a question for me? Because I'm not, I think, am I going to another panel? Do you know anything about that? I only
Oh.
have one link, but I thought I was on a panel with other people, but maybe I'm not. I'm
I'm
gonna,
not 100% sure.
the small group Zoom, you with the other panel. Yeah, the smaller group
Yeah,
Zoom, you'll be with other panelists and you will have a moderator there leading the discussion that
Oh,
is much
so-
smaller.
I think it'll be another Zoom link.
Okay, I don't
uh,
have that.
Okay.
I just got one Zoom link. Now that's none of your business, but I'm
No,
just
I
telling you.
wonder if have you been in contact with, is it Jonathan?
Rebecca. No,
Oh,
Rebecca.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe
Anyway.
If you could ping her.
Okay. Okay. I will do that.
I'm
But
so
let me do that
sorry.
now because I think it might start at 12 or something, but who knows?
Oh, okay. Okay. I'm sorry. I couldn't be of more help.
No, you did great. Happy to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Yeah,
having me.
well, thank you so
Pleasure.
much. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye. 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 Bye.
Bye.
Bye.